All right, there are a lot of interesting vaccines and treatments coming up right now for dealing with the coronavirus. But what's kind of interesting is just keeping track of all of them. You have Gilead's experimental COVID-19 drug that's showing promise. You also have Inovio Pharmaceuticals, Cavuto Biologics working with Beijing and the Institute of Technology in a phase 2 drug of their own. Pfizer and Sanofi and Moderna. I could go on and on. But the bottom line here is there are a lot of possible vaccines and treatments out there. Peter Pitts is the former FDA Associate Commissioner, Center for Medicine and the Public Interest. Peter, very good to have you. What do you make of these various treatments that are out there?
Well, I'm optimistic, and I think that the big story here is that you have pharmaceutical companies working together with each other, with government, with academic institutions, with regulators around the world. Lots of shots on goal here, both on existing and possibly new therapeutics and vaccines. So I think that's the way to get it done. All of a sudden, everybody realizes in a crisis the value that everybody brings to the table. And it isn't a question of adversarial relationships. It's a question of alliances for the public health. So I'm pretty optimistic.
So how does it normally work, Commissioner, when we have so many companies competing on the same front or trying to sometimes work in coordination with each other on this? Vaccines can take years. There's a push to try to get some out and rush through clinical trials and the rest so that maybe we have something by the end of this year. But how optimistic are those assumptions to you?
Well, vaccines are tough. I think for a vaccine for COVID, I'm looking at maybe 10 months to a year, and obviously that's fast by vaccine standards. But right now, we've also got to figure out that once we have a vaccine or 2 or 3 that's approved, how do we handle the manufacturing? We've got to share facilities. There aren't enough of them. And then how do we prioritize who gets vaccinated first? Healthcare workers, police officers, firefighters, people who are stocking our supermarket shelves. Is it regional? A lot of questions yet to be answered, but I'm pretty optimistic about an approved vaccine 10 months to a year.
Commissioner, memory serves me right, a SARS vaccine wasn't available until well past the end or the worst of the crisis. So how did that and the deaths and the problems around it, more the incidents, correct themselves without an available vaccine?
Well, I think the major difference between SARS and COVID-19 is the difference between containment and mitigation. We weren't able to contain COVID-19. We were able to contain SARS. So right now we're mitigating the damage that COVID is having across the nation with SARS, which was really a U.S., Canada, Hong Kong issue. We were able to mitigate it, to really stop it dead in its tracks. And the value of the defense against vaccines, that vaccines bring against viruses is that it denies them the oxygen they need to survive, and that's humans. So with SARS, we were able to keep the virus out of harm's way by mitigating it and containing it to a few countries. With COVID-19, we're having to put mitigation strategies into place. Obviously, number one mitigation strategy, social distancing and sheltering in place. But I think with a vaccine or even with better therapeutics, we can keep the symptoms less severe. We can shorten the duration of the disease, which makes sure that hospitals don't get as crowded, that people mostly take care of themselves at home. And the FDA's job is to make sure that they expedite these programs rather than rushing them. And that's a regulatory finesse that I think the FDA is doing a very good job with right now.
Real quickly, while I have you, sir, what do you make of the use of hydroxychloroquine to address this full-scale statewide test they got going on in South Dakota and elsewhere that it might show promise? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the solid science that those types of studies are going to bring us are essential, because the plural of anecdote, isn't data. But I think we're going down a parallel track. We're collecting the real science, the solid, randomized controlled double-blind clinical trials that we need to really think about these things and from a scientific basis. But on a parallel track, we're also allowing physicians to use these tools in hospital on their own discretion. I think what's interesting is this parallel track concept started in the 1980s with HIV/AIDS, and the federal government lead there was Anthony Fauci. So there are people in government right now that recognize, on the one hand, the importance of sound science, but also the reality that we live in right now, need to get these drugs into patients at the doctor's discretion and under the control of a physician.
All right, Commissioner, we'll watch it closely. Thank you for taking the time. The Commissioner just mentioned Dr. Fauci. I'm sure his name might come up once or twice today at the Healthcare Task Force briefing. Stick around after this.